My vengeance ends now.
After an arduous battle through the Greek pantheon for revenge, mistakes and anger, and most importantly, hope, a once thought mortal finds himself lost after 5 years of a forgotten legacy, last seen in a very mediocre game. But just like a phoenix from the ashes, he rises up in a new unknown north world as an old, familiar and wiser dad, better than ever, transformed into such a beautiful new shape that reaches almost perfection of blending a long year's story in a complete new one. That is as captivating and stunning for newcomers as it is challenging and brilliantly reminiscent for long-term fans. I know it's been 3 years since it came out, but in respect to the 3-year rule that the franchise once had, and because I've been playing all of them all over again, I found inspiration and excitation to talk about that so known glorious 2018 game, God of War. Being myself one of those long-term fans, it's hard to look at this game and say anything that might harm its aura and soul. But as an objective critic, it's not for nothing that this game got such praise and scores that it's so well deserved. Going one by one from narrative, coherent soundtrack, and overall combat and level design, it's right on the nose that no matter what you do in the game or what your preference in games is, this one is a smash hit when it comes to making the whole journey, the highs, lows, dramatic and sensitive times in between the main or secondary missions all come together as one journey meant to be that the player himself feels part of and invested in. On a personal level, even for a player who doesn't know the whole picture, the pieces of dialogue and gameplay that seem to be missing something come across as of narrative purpose and not enough so that the player doesn't understand. Part of every important mystery and story element that has and will be explained later on, or if you go search for it. After the iconic success of the PS3 classic God of War 3, that concluded the epic mythological trilogy of Kratos, the too bald and angry to die character that amidst an immense gory cloud that covered a huge part of the games, was shaped from a dislikable hero into an unforgivable and compassionate villain, that through the horrors and mistakes of his life came to a conclusion to give hope. In a story about unfairness and tragedy, hope is what made him end it. Or so we thought. Because you see, then he crawls out of frame after impaling himself in the end of the game, and then you'll be like, what the fuck? And you search online and it says, he can't die because of curse. Well, that explains the numerous deaths he survived that I thought were because of that hope. But it was. In the original trilogy, it was unconscious hope that made Kratos push on. Just like sometimes our everyday selves. And reject over and over again death. That part may be not as realistic. But that might as well be pushed aside and forgotten now. Because this is a new Kratos, a human Kratos. Not counting the super strength, of course. Santa Monica Studios knew that the lineage and heritage of the legacy left the PS2 and PS3 classics of God of War were very much in line with the production of this game. And it's plain to see, not just by watching the making of, how this was like a baby for Santa Monica, even for Sony, and definitely for Cory Barlog. Of all people, it was a treasure. A dream kept in secret and in shadows of doubt through 5 years of production that could either be one risky investment that could lead to disaster or one of the mightiest examples, close to perfection might I say, of a great consolidation of storytelling, gameplay, quality and innovation in single-player games. And oh boy, am I proud to say it ended up being the latter. After the repetitive and secure gimmick of the enraged protagonist anti-hero hack and slash that was before, in 2018 God of War dared to innovate, adopting the character in the corner perspective with full control of the camera, popularized by the Batman Arkham Saga games. It was made, with surprising results, to be very personal, while at the same time very combat focused, where it wasn't enough to be unfair, but it dared the players to challenge their skills further, in perfect correlation with attack defense and dodge dynamics, much like the Souls game. To create one of the most realistic types of combat I've ever seen in a game, making you so immersed in the moment where you need to be aware of your surroundings with and without help of the game, and very strategic with your opponents in each encounter and enemy, with stunt mechanics elements and special attacks given by runes and other perks with enchantments. In my experience, most of these mechanics don't really compel me that much in other games. I sometimes end up doing the whole game without thinking twice. But not that this made me think, but it got me hooked in these dynamics. The type of ways I can get each enemy stunned, if fire or ice works better, and if my fist is better than my axe. And talking about axe, presenting another yet challenging come through of this game development. I will not say much more of this, for I know nothing, but the team that made the axe physics and mechanics work this beautifully. Is the prime team in the game development my seal of approval, whatever they may mean. There's also the aspect of Atreus, the boy. He has his own button, fighting to your orders, and probably turns to be one of the best sidekicks in games that I've ever seen, sometimes making a literal difference in combat, as well making combos with yourself, like you attack a heavy axe and got hunched over, and he out of nowhere wham, like a ninja. But the great thing about all of this, even if this is your game where you don't care about these things, it still works incredibly well as you progress, like muscle memory. And it talks of the usefulness of Atreus in combat, which he can make a huge difference. Every single skill of his boosts up more his abilities to help in combat, but there's this little aspect that is a bit out there. I may overlook it because it makes sense in some narrative purpose, but Atreus sometimes, especially in the beginning, can be caught by enemies, calling you for help to free him, or get him back up, which seems like a good detail, right? And for narrative purposes, yeah, it makes sense when he is unexperienced, but my problem with it is that it happens very few times in the whole game to make it important or even rememberable. For real, I wouldn't have remembered it if I hadn't played again for this video. All the while, the game lets you experience it however you please, more into combat, strategy, narrative, and even immersive at the point of a movie, without the HUD to check your stuff, making you be even more aware of yourself while enjoying the fullest of the beauty that is North God of War and its realms. Finishing in the combat mechanics talk, one thing that I would like to point out is the tiny aspect of timing. It is as well other thing to talk good about this game, for timing is crucial in a challenging and fun combat experience. The enemies from fast to slow attacks and combination of both. The use of your defense that you have to get used to with the shield, because it doesn't come up immediately. You just get used to it like muscle memory to get the timing right. Which, to finish this bit, I see as such a delight aspect of this new version of the old countering mechanic that the God of War series always had, the iconic ricochet. There's only one problem I find in this. If you are playing in the normal mode, I mean with the HUD, there's going to be arrows around the hip of Kratos, which point to a nearby enemy that is not seen on screen and tells when it might attack when going red from white. And it takes perfect account of the general reaction reflexes of the player, for when it glows red is just moments before it really attacks, giving the right amount of time for the player to dodge the attack, like it was at the perfect time. But where I feel it goes wrong is with projectiles. For this, it doesn't go red. It glows into a magenta, and the timing is not like normal attacks. It starts glowing when the enemy is preparing the attack, and not when throwing. I get it that it's better this way because of differences of distance and the enemies and the attacks may have, but because it warns you when it's preparing the attack. The player reacts upon it like a normal attack, dodging as soon as the player can. But then the enemy, while preparing, has enough time to redirect the trajectory of the attack, making the player have to roll over and over until the player sees the attack pass. Sure, it's practically nothing, but sometimes annoying.
Another thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention in the original script is the Valkyries. I cannot believe how I forgot to mention the Valkyries. For me, an important aspect and detail of this world, of this game, not just bringing more lore and bringing more interest in all different mythology that is coming into this game altogether, but actually recently I found out how important the Valkyries are for what may come for the next God of War game. But staying on focus, the Valkyries for me are just the best kind of enemy and challenge boss optional. Even in the main line, it's just, for me, it's the best enemy that God of War in all of its series ever had. Just on its basic combat mechanics. Even though optional, it's already amazing just how intimidating and the urge that you feel every time you find a Valkyrie to fight her. It's something that literally just takes over my body. Each one of them has a different skill move, a different set of attacks, and used or different elements. The Valkyries are an exceptional enemy. Each one of them has a different kind of move set, and it's definitely the most challenging boss that has ever been in the God of War game. Doesn't matter what difficulty you put on. Every time you bring it up a notch with any Valkyrie, it's gonna be the best experience you'll ever get from a boss, even though it's optional. I mean, most of the good bosses in games, we have to admit, most of them are optional. The Valkyries are such an exceptional foe, just not because of their variations in each one of them, especially in the Queen. When you get to fight the Queen after defeating all of the others, it's such a thrill because the Queen has all of the others' movesets. So it's just more challenging, and that's the real deal. As I talked, the combat mechanics are very challenging, very like Souls-like. You need to get used to it. You have to be aware of your surroundings, plan a little strategy in a moment, use the boy. It utilizes that already established combat mechanic, strategy, and self-awareness, and brings it to a whole new level. Because it's just one foe. It doesn't bring minions. None of them bring minions. It's challenging. It's the most challenging you'll ever get in the game, no matter what difficulty you play. If you put it on Give Me God of War, everything will be difficult. Yes, but nothing will bring more joy and more experience, per se, more challenge than the Valkyries. And the Valkyries is such... I like them so much because they're not tough in the sense of unfairness. Because when I talk about this, I always bring the example of Kingdom Hearts. Kingdom Hearts, I know, it doesn't even have anything to do with the combat style of God of War. None of them. Even though, yeah, you could say it's a hack and slash. But I always remember, especially in optional bosses and just bosses in general, these types of, especially Japanese games, there are some Western games that do this as well, but mostly it's seen more in Japanese games. If you play it, if you know the techniques, if you know the mechanics, if you know how it is programmed even, the battles in themselves are much more about stats. it doesn't really go into detail about strategy or not. In any kind of battle, you can put strategy on it, or, of course, because it's a battle. Of course, there's always gonna be some kind of strategy, unless you're reckless like me. But in the kind of bosses, in the kind of boss fights that you have in this type of games, specifically talking about Kingdom Hearts here, it's more about stats, how strong you are. You can go all in and all out, pretty much like the old God of War games. You can also not give a crap about strategy and just go in because you're strong. You can do this in this game as well, but with the Valkyries you can't. It's because even the weakest one, you'll have to get around it. You have to know what she's gonna do, because if you just be reckless, if you just like throw all of the runes up on her, the kids' runes, your runes, even the Blade's runes, probably you won't get her. You will need to keep on your toes until you finish her, because they're challenging, and they're the good kind of challenging. Going back into the comparison to Kingdom Hearts bosses, I remember specifically the secret boss. Is it secret? I don't know. The secret boss of Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. When you finish all of the 3 storylines and you get to the end and to the real final boss. When I was playing that, I saw it. It was more about stats of how much I've progressed, how much I have leveled up myself, than really being good at that fight. I got to a point where I just got lucky and memorized all of his attacks and just got lucky. That was it. In that specific boss fight, I just felt lucky for winning. I did all I could. I memorized, I upgraded as much as I could, but it was so frustrating. The guy was broken. It was literally, I cannot explain because it's been years since I played it, but the memory is instilled in my mind. It's a broken game. It's a broken boss, mostly. It's a great game, don't get me wrong, but that boss in specifically, and it is optional, you need to work for it. There are certain attacks that physically or statistically you cannot avoid. You really need to get under it and pray that you dodge it somehow, because I remember that the screen went all white, and like in Dark Souls, you better have your health up there because it's gonna do some damage. It was very much about luck and stats. You didn't feel the challenge. The only challenge you felt was much more like poker. I lose, I have the urge to win again. It doesn't matter if I'm good at it or bad, I just want to win. And there's where I see that the Valkyries are just exceptional, because they're not about luck. Sure, you could have luck in anything you do in life. You could have strategy in anything you do in life, but this is what is important. It's real goddamn war. All of them are exceptional foes, different movesets, different type of elements, and you need to, or either if you don't have that much luck and responsive reflections, getting the pattern of their moves in your head, you really need to get into it. You can't go all on stats and luck. They're amazing foe. My top 1 best bosses I've ever played in any game.
Besides the vast complexity that is perfectly mixed together in the combat, the level design is probably the most fun and diverse in the game. Still, with its corners to refine, it quite literally gave me the experience of exciting to explore. The boundaries of the game and how they develop are perfect for any kind of player. May it be a completionist that wants to do all he can before actually going through the story, or someone that focuses more on that and leaves all the upgrades and exploration for later. It balances perfectly those two worlds. The upgrades and rewards themselves are all thought out. You cannot get more than what's out there already, and how the level design helps you be prepared, but not too prepared, for the many confrontations of the game is something to be reckoned. And the change of difficulty affects more the way enemies power and resist to attacks. But when it comes to leveling up, it's all fair. How the world evolves is exactly what teaches you what you can or cannot yet do. If you go and search for everything that you can before starting your true journey, you cannot find it all, keeping up the linear storytelling tradition of God of War, but now blending in on what it seems to be an open world. You might get more powerful for what lies ahead, but never enough that makes the rest of the game too easy, for many other loot still lies ahead hidden. A perfect example of this construct is the Lake of Nine. When Kratos and his son start of their journey, they come across an enormous lake rounded up by the giant snake Jormungandr. And since then, you are free to explore as you'd like the many different shores of the lake. But as the game develops, you'll not just find out about the many other places and realms with side missions and loot, but the shores of the lake themselves evolve, with the gradual rise of the snake and the fall of the lake, revealing what was hidden in the water, since keeping the exploration fresh and fair for your evolution as a character until the last minute. And such is the illusion of linearity of the classic God of War. Though still linear, it is at the same time open. It diverges into other ends for exploration and looting.
Another thing that I forgot to mention is the realms. Since I was a kid, I was always interested in mythos, in mythologies, and in all this fictional world. And even though my roots are much more seated in Greek mythology, I have picked up on something along the years, books, internet, and with this game and other stuff, the interest has been picking up. So let's talk about it. In the game, there's different versions of it. So in the game, you have Asgard, the home of the Aesir gods, Odin; Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir gods, where Frey is from; Midgard; Muspelheim, the land of the fire giants, where it says that the great fire giant, I don't remember his name, is gonna bring Ragnarok into Asgard. There's Niflheim, when in the game is the land of mists, which, if you go by the stories, it's not that Niflheim was the first realm ever, but they say that in the beginning there was only mist. In the beginning there was only space, so you can only assume that this is something primordial. But there are versions where Niflheim is just another name for the land of the dead, which in most popular belief and opinion is Hell, Helheim, the land of the dead, the eternal winter. Hell is cold, and everybody goes in there unless you died fighting. There's different ways to think about this, to interpret this, as much like the Bible. There's different ways to interpret this doomsday, like, oh, you only go to Valhalla only if you die fighting. In all of the belief of the Vikings, but even though Norse mythology is prior to the Vikings, but all in the belief of that culture, it makes sense that yes, if you die of anything else except in fight, it would be the same as dying dishonorably. And what happens if you die dishonorably? You go to hell. Yeah, it makes all the sense, because even though, yes, it has been propagating throughout the recent years that we have all the wrong perception of Viking culture, and we're just barbarians that love fighting and raping and all that. But it was indeed a part of their life, and indeed it was a part of their culture. So as much as they made offerings and rituals for farming, they also made for fights. Those two were more part of their life in general. Before fighting Europeans, they fought themselves. Fighting was all over the place, so it only makes sense. You can interpret it like, I died fighting cancer. That's honorable. You go to Valhalla. Also in the game, it's Jotunheim, of course. That's Svartalheim, where it is said to be the home of the dwarfs, which could also be called Nidavellir, and sometimes you get those two separated, because sometimes there's only Nidavellir and there's hell, or there's hell and there's Svartalheim. Sometimes it's very it gets it all mishmashed because all the source material is in poems and lost things, mostly transmitted orally, and it's very confusing. So if you go in and you go into a book and you think that book has all the answers, you don't study, okay? If you're interested in mythology, if you're interested even in history, factual history, you always have to at least question a little bit what you're reading and what you're researching. Do not get everything as fact. But it's nevertheless interesting. And then there's Alfheim, which is the land of the elves. There are some stories that also, if you see in the game, there's light elves and there's dark elves. And there's sometimes the difference in worlds. The dark elves come from one, and the light elves are from Alfheim. And sometimes, they say the dark elves come from Svartalheim. And then finally there's Jotunheim, the land of the giants. Like Atreus said,
Going to Jotunheim. We're going to find the long-lost realm of the giants. That's
Inconvenient.
we don't get to explore all of the realms. It's important to get all this cosmology intrinsed into the world. So in the game you get to experience Midgard, of course. You get to experience Alfheim, which it's a place full of light before you've gone there, of course, because Dark Elves have taken over, but is filled with a new type of enemy that flies around, gets behind you, all over, but also die when you throw them off cliffs. There's also Niflheim and Muspelheim. Yes, there's Jotunheim as well, but yeah. And there's Helheim, of course, which for interesting purposes I've found out in my streams. If you want to watch, no, I'm Spartacus, channel is available. Kratos actually shivers when he is in Helheim. So it means that we finally found what is enough cold for Kratos. Kratos can survive in the cold with blades of chaos because they hit him up, but still he gets a little frisky. And then again, there's Niflheim and Muspelheim. Muspelheim, being the land of fire, is a place in the game where you have the traditional arena challenges. And then you have Niflheim, which is the most entertaining and interesting part of this additions to the game, because these two are not necessary. They're like an addition that even made the fans believe that there would be DLCs for Vanaheim, for Asgard, and others. Niflheim is a continuing space of fog, a toxic fog that every time you get in, you have a little bar of life that when it runs out, you die, of course. And it is filled with the different materials that when getting in to the known labyrinth, if you die there, you lose them forever. But the most important part of the Niflheim, that it uses that mechanic of the toxic mist and adds a little challenge to it, which is the named labyrinth. It's always in the constant flux. It's a automatic generated labyrinth, a randomly generated labyrinth. Every time you get in, it's gonna be different. Every time you think that it's the same, you pass through a new stage and it's different. But very much like in Muspelheim, when you reach the final test, there's a Valkyrie there. And that just makes it more worth it. This game, not just by itself, as amazing as it is, it keeps adding on. So the classic Muspelheim challenge arena and Niflheim with this new kind of challenge only possible by the random statistics. And with good loot as well.
On the talks of looting, right on the first chest and relic you encountered, there's an interaction after. May it be from the boy, or from other characters, already establishing that whatever might you do, it's all part of the story. Wherever you may go, it's part of the journey, and the characters react accordingly. There's bits of dialogue that you just know the actors got extra to do that brings more content and context to your journey. Like it is all put together as they knew what you were about to do. Nowadays, I get it how this might not seem as fascinating as it once was, but it's something remarkable in its own right. The feel of reality in your finger, that everything is meant to be. Not like shooting seagulls in Metal Gear Solid.
Right, and do you actually enjoy abusing helpless animals?
I don't believe this.
The same strategy of unveiling the world is used in the skill tree, adapting much of the same gimmick that was used in the old games, collecting points, now XP, to level up your skills further, but adapting together with the story development. Most of the skills are level restricted in each sector. The axe, the blades, and some of the boy skills too. Translating into a natural evolution, even if you wouldn't want to waste XP on everything, and just keep it for the last best stuff, you will definitely notice how the usage of the weapons and your own play tactics evolve nonetheless, from kind of rusty and new into fluid and experienced fighting skills like a true master of the axe, all through story development. Something that is of no need to point out is the sheer quality of graphical power of this bad boy. That makes any old PS4 scream in pain. The beautiful detail put into every effort, and they even went to the trouble of making an excuse for the weapon be hanged in his back. Just remember the Blades of Chaos, how they just glued to his back? So many details, the snow, the reflexes, the seaweeds, the beauty particles of magic, the bodies that you encounter along the way, the water and mud, and let's not forget the beard. Look at that beauty. Even though it seems that I have been saying a lot of good about it, and it's definitely not something new by this point, but the best parts of the game are more noticeable in its production and how well it defines the single player experience. At a time that people thought that it was coming to a downfall and consumers only wanted online games. Got to say, bunch of crap. It's been years since the industry started using mocap for their ever-evolving realism in cutscenes and character animations, to bring more naturalness and quality through the astonishing performances of the respective actors and stunt experts, who quite literally have to imagine their settings. But in God of War, these techniques are brought into another level, already established in movie productions, like the Birdman movie, with the uncut takes, making the performances, angles, and dialogue of a scene completely uncut. And much like in the movies, it is necessary that in every scene, everything has to be done perfectly, and with no mistakes, or it has to be done all over again. Coincidentally, this is one of the reasons that the production of the game was such a high risk. But oh, are we glad that it got through. This little trick is made not just by the perfect acting and work of the technical team, but as well by the perfect editing, and in the case of a game, the perfect transitions of animations. For you can see in the total journey of the game, there's not a single cut of angle, always in fluid relation between yourself and the camera, transitioning between gameplay and cutscenes sometimes seamlessly. That's why sometimes it looks like you've lost control of Kratos, cause while maintaining the angle and perspective, it's making its transition to a cutscene, and the return to gameplay is just the same. On the soundtrack, the music spectrum, the God of War franchise was never like something else. Besides its iconic design in the PS2 era, also the score stayed atop of those more recognizable and iconic scores of the consoles until now, and even in all gaming, resulting in the epic duo of the original and the iconic bald, white, angry, tattooed Spartan, and coming from such a heritage. This new North sound does not stay behind, taking advantage of its DNA. It's not just tension and sentiment, but identity. We recognize the old Kratos, the old God of War in its sound, but a more mature and transcendent one. But that's the main theme. While the other scores feel like an authentic elevation of the experience. The Mother Song, with an angelic Icelandic voice that elevates the spirit of the scene. And each and every score for each realm brings the wonder, chills, beauty and action of every situation. And I definitely listened to it as I wrote this. Through the discovering of collectibles and new enemies, the world starts to unravel itself, to bring more layers and life to what looks like an empty husk of what it once was. With Norse mythology stories, the trolls with their own speech and narrative, it all comes in pieces, only through what Atreus learned from his mother, and then teaches Kratos, and ourselves. It is such a charming way of unveiling knowledge, for we know about this world as much as Kratos does. He arrives in a strange land, settles in and focuses only on surviving and preserving himself and his family then. In the process being also a not very present father, it seems. Something that is recognizably pronounced on a deep detail of Kratos when finally catching the deer with his son. He teaches Atreus what it takes to survive, but feels powerless on the parenthood side. To comfort and care for his son, perceived in the hesitation to put his hand over his son. Other perfect moment of the growth of Kratos and his character along with the maturing of the series itself is his alone moments. With the ashes of his wife, thinking of the well-being of Atreus, here we see a layer of intimacy and seriousness that the other games never fully reached and explored. We get another taste of this new form of Kratos, still very much himself on the surface, but the weight of the situation, how personal and intimate it feels, penetrates even his tough exterior. It's unanimously seen here already what the game has to offer. Deep feelings is what it is, and if you're a dad by coincidence, oh boy, it might just hit the damn right. Yes, I did not make a complete breakthrough of the game, for as much as I love it, it is just tiresome to write so much and even more good about it. It follows the heritage and fundamentals of the God of War franchise, like literally, telling to go here, do this, go there, do that, but opening up to a world so much more deep-rooted in sentiment, heart and dedication, than just mindless gore and revenge. Picking up on the deepness left of the old, here there's drama, hope, lessons after lessons, and psychology in this. But I don't mean in analysis, I mean that the game faces these themes head on, with focus on the father and son relationship, already so scared with the past of Kratos that we actually see near the end, but now made more down to earth and more articulate to our level. What I mean with this is that the growth of Atreus and Kratos' relationship during these fantastical events, it's no different from what happens in real life parenthood and childhood. The need for acknowledgement from a father, the uncertainty of a parent of how to deal with a son, communication, teaching morals and overall fear of what a son might think, deal with, and make of the world around him. Like in the time where Atreus needs to learn that he is of a god heritage or it would eventually kill him. Such things happen psychologically. Not just real hereditary illnesses, but as well with family relationships that are not developed through dialogue and understanding. A son goes over his head on being a god and what that means for him, putting fear on the parent. A fear that his son might become or do what he himself was and did. Continuing the cycle. Basically, the game shows how scary it is not just being a parent, but to be a son or a daughter as well. And even though there's objectively much pressure in caring for a child, the responsibility sometimes goes both ways, in certain situations. A father fears for the care and growth of his son as much as his son fears for the understanding and love of his father. And though the journey is difficult and painful, this game shows that with that, it is all the more rewarding, and that we should never give up on our own blood, may it be parent or child. Through communication and understanding and effort, it's where true bonds are held tight. At least that's what I got from it. I'm not a parent, so I wouldn't know. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Though I wish it was longer, it gave me a lot to go through, and revisiting such a remarkable piece of game is truly something else. And probably you don't want to hear more of this. Yeah, quality.